Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to thank and pay our respects to the elders, past, present, and emerging. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Sero Boost, the Happiness Science Insights podcast, produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. We are champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week, we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I'm your host, Ngo, coming to your ears from Naarm, Melbourne, Australia. Let's learn together. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Sero Boost. We're back to talk about all things happiness, and today we're talking about characteristics of a trustworthy person and how to build trust. Last week, we already talked about trust, but from an organizational context, and this week we're talking about it from a more personal approach and more applicable to all of us, to our daily lives. But I also know that our guest today is very experienced working with leaders, so hopefully this conversation is going to spark a lot of thoughts and it'll be very helpful for the everyday people as much as the leaders. Okay, so today, the reason why we invited Amy to join us is because of her background. She has a very impressive background. I'm going to share that with you in a little bit. And also, I'll introduce Amy and get her to share a bit more about herself. Amy Eliza Wong is the founder of Always on Purpose. She is an executive leadership coach, author, speaker, and facilitator working with organizations such as Salesforce, Roku, LinkedIn, Lyft, Genentech, and more. Amy offers transformative leadership development and cutting-edge communication strategies to executives and corporate teams around the world, as well as institutions including Stanford University and the University of California at Berkeley. As a conversational intelligence certified executive coach with expertise in transpersonal psychology, design thinking, public speaking, interpersonal, and and interpersonal neurobiology, Amy has cut that as well. I'm going to do this second paragraph again, so you can edit that whole part out. As a conversational intelligence certified executive coach with expertise in transpersonal psychology, design thinking, public speaking, and interpersonal neurobiology, Amy has catalyzed transformative growth for hundreds of executives and teams. She has a passion for helping leaders identify blind spots, reclaim precious time, energy, and creative bandwidth, and create next-level impact. Her best-selling new book, Living on Purpose, won 2022 Book of the Year by The Magic Pen. And I'm very excited that I get to talk to Amy today. Oh, I'm so excited. And Amy, thanks so much for joining us all the way from, I think, the Bay Area. That's where you are, right?
That's right. Berkeley, California. That's right. It's
awesome.
a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I know it's dinner time for you almost. And that's why we were saying, this conversation is important, but we're going to be punchy as much as we can. So we're going to go straight to the point. And before we go into some of the questions in the section where we get to know Amy, would you like to share anything else with our listeners? I know that you already have a very impressive bio, but perhaps you would like to just share a little more about yourself, your journey, or a little bit about the why you got here and why you're doing what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been coaching now. I founded Always on Purpose in 2011, so it's been over a decade. But the truth is I've been coaching far longer than that. I just didn't really know it. I studied math in college at UC Berkeley. So as a mathematician, ended up quite techie. I worked at Sun Microsystems, and it was interesting, all through my life, I would find myself in these roles or situations where I was a facilitator, a teacher, and I was translating constantly, whether it was, content for students or whether it was from development to end user, always in this translation role. And it wasn't until my first child, who is now 14, that I really had this wake-up call. And I just, my life was fabulous, but I didn't realize until I had Aiden that there was something really missing. And after I had him, it was such this wake-up call. My gosh, and a lot of parents will experience this after they have a child. It's everything comes into question. And so I had this breakthrough experience and realized that I wasn't attending to all of me. And so I, through totally out of inspiration, I went back, got my master's in transpersonal psychology. And it's funny because everybody's like, what? Math and transpersonal psychology? How do you do, what's that about? And it's interesting for me, it makes perfect sense because I've just been the seeker of truth all of my life. Really, very much into consciousness studies as a kid, started meditating young. But this idea for truth and search for truth, that's why I loved math. Then I went to go seek it in a different way with transpersonal psychology. And interestingly, didn't know it, but these two fields together just bridge to and lend themselves perfectly to the field of coaching. And so coaching found me in 2010, and it took off. And so now I primarily work with leaders because just the trickle-down effect is tremendous. I'm able to help create impact at a bigger scale when can work with folks that are able to influence others at scale. But the truth is I've worked with so many individuals, whether that's college graduates or it's, lawyers or doctors or single moms or celebrities or you name it. But at this phase of my life, I'm really working with leaders, and where I'm really focused is on all things growth, transformation, and flow. And a big area of expertise and passion of mine is this medium of communication, because this is where everything happens. It's in this medium, but we don't really think about it that way. Mm. And so this is a big entry point for a lot of leaders and a lot of folks, a lot of teams, because everybody wants to get better at this medium. And this is really the entry point for the real work, because all communication is symptomatic of the deeper stuff, of which is all that coaching stuff as well. So Ooh. That's me in a nutshell.
Wow, what an interesting journey. You see, this is what I love about hearing stories. Like you read the bio and you're like, oh, she's doing impressive things. And then when you hear about the journey, you're like, wait, what? How? Oh, that's why, Yeah. So interesting. Yeah. Thank you for sharing. I think that journey just really probably speaks to a lot of parents, because like you said, something changed, after you had your first child. And for those that can relate, I'm sure they'll be like, yes, someone knows about what I'm talking about, so yeah, that's beautiful. And thank you for being here. Really appreciate your time. And without further ado, let's get to know you a little more. We call this section, Have You Met Amy? We love to hear some of your recommendations, things that have been on your mind, or just simply things that you love and you would like to share with others. The first question is related to books. So what is a book you would like to talk about today?
A book I would like to talk about, well, it really, that answer changes for me. With anybody I'm talking to, it depends on what's important.
Yeah.
For for anyone at hand, and there are so many incredible works right now. I have to say, if you really want to dive deep, if you really want your eyes opened, I just finished it was a page turner for me, and the book is called The Myth of Normal, and it's by Gabor Mate, and it's about just healing in a toxic culture, and it's just I love all of his work, but I have to say, if books for me, that's a source of deep learning. Books, that's the word that comes to mind when I hear the word book, is learn. And the book, The Myth of Normal, is really powerful.
Yeah, I've added it to my cart. Thank you so much.
Okay. Yeah.
The good thing of having my computer in front of me. Thank you. I'll definitely read it.
Yeah.
Really, really good finds today. My previous guest recommended a book as well. I was like, I'm adding that to my cart. So I've had 2 books today that I'm going to read. Good. Thank you so much. And yeah, I agree. Books are about learning. So that's our first thing to cover. The second thing is a little more fun for those who don't read as much. What about a movie you would like to talk about today?
I am a big fan of movies that make me happy. I don't like movies that stress me out. And I'll just say the last thing we did this past weekend, Ant-Man just came out, the new Marvel movie.
Oh, the Quantumania one?
Yeah. And I just find so much joy watching movies with my kids. I've got a 14-year-old and a 10-year-old.
Yeah.
My husband loves those movies. So that's that's what's on top of mind for me. Is we went to the theater for that one. That was pretty fun.
Yeah, it is fun.
Goofy fun. Super goofy fun.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of people are like, oh, it's so bad. I'm like, but it's fun. It's fun to watch.
Yeah.
Why are you so picky? Anyways, that's a whole different topic in itself. But thank you. That's a good one. What about a podcast you would like to share with us?
Yeah, I'm not a big consumer of podcasts, but the one podcast that I will turn to, and I actually find myself listening to more than any other, is the Huberman Lab. I just love all of the work that he does. I get a lot of nuggets and anecdotes, research for a lot of the work that I do to just back up stuff that I offer in my workshops. And I find it fascinating, and I think he does a phenomenal job.
Yeah, that's a really good one. Thank you. Next question, my favorite one to ask, because this is different for each person, and I find the answers to be telling us a bit more about that person. It's about role model. Who would be your role model? This could be a famous person or just someone that you personally admire.
That would be Louise Hay. And she is, not many, I've mentioned her a few times to folks. People are like, wait, who is she? She is one of the pioneers of, you could consider it of positive psychology. You can think of like metaphysics. She founded a Hay House, but she is one of those, you could even consider like new age thinkers, but not just brilliant, beautiful woman who really carved out a whole way of thinking and a way of healing for humanity, and just a beautiful human who has done so much good in the world. And I respect her greatly.
Yeah. You know what's crazy? Today, our previous guest, who also talked about trust, mentioned that her favorite book, which I added to my cart, is You Can Heal Your Life by Louise Hay.
No way. I was going to say You Can Heal Your Life by Louise Hay.
Yeah.
Wow. That's not synchronicity, I don't know what is.
Yeah.
That's
Well,
awesome.
I mean, you're both experts in trust. Just, you have, I think your work would connect beautifully. I mean, if you're interested in our show, you can check out that episode. And
I will absolutely
let us know what you think.
Yes.
Because that's why I said, trust is such a broad concept, which is why we need to explore it from different perspectives. And our previous guest already talked about it, but you are going to talk about it in a very different way. I can assure our listeners that. So I just found that so fascinating. And thank you for sharing. Yeah, I'm like, there's a Louise Hay theme today. I'm going to...
and it's a little obscure. I mean, most people probably wouldn't mention her, but that's awesome.
Yeah, it's cool. Yeah. I'm going to have to learn more about her after this. Oh, so good. Okay, and finally, the final question in this section is, what is a course you've completed that you would like to share with us?
Well, how about this one? I will tell you what I'm enrolled in right now. Oh. And so I am currently enrolled in a 2-year certification program for mindfulness meditation teacher certification. So a huge part of my own personal practice, but also a huge part of the work that I do is bringing the art of mindfulness to everything and anything that we do, because it really is the agent for true transformation, is the ability to be self-aware and mindful. And it's so powerful. So I thought, it's such a big part of my life, and it really is a big part of the work that I offer to the world. I think I'm just going to dive in and go so deep in this. So I'm currently enrolled in that. So I'm not done, but I'm on my way.
Oh, wow. That's so cool. Yeah, I love that. Yeah. It's like a passion of you that, it's just so true to whatever you've been talking about this whole time. I'm not surprised to hear, but that's a really cool course. And it sounds like it's going to take a while, but I'm sure it'll be worth it. So
totally.
Enjoy. I'm sure a lot of people would like to get into these kinds of courses nowadays, especially as, we're more conscious of our health and well-being, in a holistic way. So that's right. Super cool. All right. Thank you. That wraps up our 5 questions in the Have You Met Amy section. And now we're going to go into the key part of today. We're going to talk about all things happiness and trust. So let's get started by talking about happiness. This is a question, again, I always ask all of my guests, and I assure you all the answers are different. I have not heard 2 answers that kind of sync completely. There are some aspects that are different. what does happiness mean to you?
So happiness is a state of inner calm and flourishing, where there is this sense of possibility, but also that we hold, that we are able to feel really a deep sense of purpose and meaning. And all of that together, to me, is what I think of as happiness. And that's synonymous to joy as well. And often we, in the studies, happiness and joy tend to be different. But for me, when I think about happy, I marry it with joy, and it's just what I said.
Yeah, beautiful. I think in our framework, joy is actually an element of happiness. So it's interesting to see how, different perspectives come together because, it's kind of like, are they interchangeable? Are they different? Are they the same? Does one include the other, But yeah, I really like that definition. That is why you founded Always on Purpose, I would assume, because you're talking about purpose. So that's very amazing to hear. And I want to ask you this question regarding misconceptions. Now, I always say in my show that each person would identify different misconceptions based on their personal definition. In your definition, you mentioned a lot about purpose and meaning. So I'm sure you have met people, come across instances or situations where you notice that people are not living a happy life, or they're not understanding happiness correctly because of a wrong understanding of purpose, perhaps. So that's my guess. But what is it to you? What are some of the misconceptions you've seen when it comes to happiness?
Yeah, we could ultimately draw a map to kind of purpose and meaning, but really, I think where the misconceptions are is that our happiness is outside of ourselves, and it's in the conditions around us. And at the end of the day, and I talk about this all the time, everything we want, everything we think we want, the goals that we set, the desires that we have, the aspirations that we hold in our head, everything, we all want it, not for the thing. It's not for the amount of money. It's not for the house. It's not. And so, but there's this idea that if I get these things, I'll be happy. But really, if you get right down to it, everything we want, everything we think we want, it's because of the feeling we think we would have as a result of the thing. And what happens is we don't really take that all the way and think about it that way, and we stop at the thing. And so happiness gets placed at the thing level. And so then many of us go around and try to chase the things, achieve the thing, move the thing, or rearrange the thing, and we're placing our power and our happiness in the world around us. But that really, it's an unwinnable quest and game, because, we can't move the pieces around enough to ever get that sense of fulfillment and meaning that really has nothing to do with that outside world.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think I saw the other day someone shared an article about why having too much stuff drags you down. And I know when you said the thing, it doesn't necessarily mean just stuff. It could be an experience or something you do. But yeah, I just resonate with that so hard. I was like, wow, this is eye-opening. I didn't read the whole article. I need to find it again. But yeah, I think it's true. The idea of, just having this, doing the next thing and the next one, and, just accumulate, and kind of like, sometimes you hoard things, sometimes you hoard experiences, could be dangerous. And I have heard quite a few others who talked about this as well. So couldn't agree more.
It takes a lot of bandwidth, to manage all that stuff. It takes a lot of bandwidth. And then to keep up with it all takes even more bandwidth and more resources. And so we end up working really hard in order to achieve all that stuff and consume all that stuff. And it just eats away at our well-being.
Yeah, absolutely. Ooh, what an eye-opener, All right, so now we've covered happiness, we've covered the misconceptions of happiness, and I would like to direct all of our attention to the topic of today. We're going to talk about trust. We're going to talk about characteristics of a trustworthy person and how to build trust. But to you, Amy, how would you define trust for our audience?
Yeah. So trust, a lot of people think it's an emotion, and it's one of those things where we don't really put it in the spotlight because we think it's just this byproduct of getting along, or, hey, we have this history, or we have so much in common. But trust isn't an emotion. Trust is a neurological state in which we are optimized for our greatest thinking, our biggest risk-taking, empathy, for taking disparate ideas, bringing them together, and innovating. So trust really is this biological, neurological state of one in which we are in thriving mode. So there's two states. We're either in survival mode or we're thriving. And so trust, in order for trust to be active, now trust, that lives in our prefrontal cortex. That's the most executive functioning part of the brain. For that to be online, we have to be feeling a sense of safety. There has to be this sense of like, okay, I am safe. So at the end of the day, the best way for me to define trust in the way that I work with folks and the way that, when we want to increase trust, it's easiest to map it to the word safety. And I mean, there's many, but the neat thing about, if you ask anybody to double click on trust, they'll give you so many words like honesty and reliability and consistency and open-mindedness and vulnerability and transparency. All of that is right. All of it. Whatever trust means to people, that is right. I like to talk about it from a neurobiological standpoint because it's important to understand, like, well, what is it and what does it afford us? And so at the end of the day, it really is a sense of safety. And from that place of safety, so much is possible biologically, right? From that parasympathetic nervous system, we can actually rest and digest and we can, heal. But when we're not in that sense of safety, when we don't have that sense of safety and we're in that distrust, it's a totally different ballgame.
Yeah. I think that's a new way of looking at trust for a lot of us, because I think you're right. Like when it comes to trust, a lot of people might say, oh yeah, it's just a feeling. Like, I feel like I can trust this person. That's just how it is.
Yeah. Yeah. And there definitely is an associated feeling with trust, right? Which is one of good and open and connected and open-minded, curious, eager, empathetic. All of these things are feelings that do arise from that state of trust. But in order for that to happen, we do have to feel safe.
Yeah.
And interestingly, our brain's always trying to keep us safe. And the brain can't differentiate between environmental threats, like say a tiger jumping out of a bush, and social threats. So that's, say, a boss throwing you under the bus in a meeting. So your brain's always looking out for these things. And so we need to be safe in order to be functional, in order to flourish, to thrive. And so yes, environmentally. Now for us humans, most of us aren't having to contend with environmental threats on a day-to-day basis, like we would have in the cave people days. Really, the threats we're contending with are the social ones. And that's where we feel our safety being compromised, is socially.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Because I think on your website, you also mentioned that trust is the ultimate currency.
Yes.
We're kind of conceptualizing a lot of different things here. And it seems like there's a way that we can leverage trust by understanding it, because if it's the ultimate currency, it seems that it can help us in multiple situations in life, especially in our personal life and just how we carry ourselves and going through our days. Because I think you are right when saying that it's associated with safety, and obviously there are feelings that come with feeling safe and having that trust. But like a lot of the time we don't realize that we don't feel okay because we don't have the trust. We could associate that with something else. And we don't realize that, oh, you know what? I'm feeling this way because I don't feel safe. I don't think that there's trust there. So I think for a lot of people, defining what it is in the first place might be a challenging thing. And how we use that currency as well is another interesting part of the process, because knowing it is one thing, using it is a whole different story. So
I would frame it this way. Yeah, I would frame it this way, that trust. So trust is that sense of safety, but trust is created or eroded in how it is that how we relate with one another. So trust is created and eroded in conversation and communication. Because here, in a vacuum, it's nothing you have to worry about. Then you just have to worry about tigers and sharp knives and sharp teeth and environmental stuff. In a vacuum, all is well. It's when you introduce other people. But then what does that mean? What's the medium by which we are relating? It's all communication. So trust is created or eroded 100% in communication with one another.
Yeah.
And the ways in which we speak and listen back and forth, these micro moments that we have, either open up or close down the brain, depending upon, do we feel safe or not safe or not safe? And so that right there is determining what's possible. Now, it's the ultimate currency, because think of it this way. I mean, it's just so basic. I mean, would you ever go buy something of significance from someone you didn't trust? No.
I wouldn't.
Would you, right? Would you share critical information with someone you didn't trust?
I wouldn't.
No.
Yeah.
Right. And so, we get this innately, and yet what we don't realize that it really is a currency that's running in the background. It's everything. And so if we cannot establish and sustain trust with those that we interact with regularly, we really make our lives so much harder. So much harder. Things take so much longer. So many more mistakes and so many more failures, so many more setbacks. And so I don't want a life like that. I'm certain that most people don't want a life like that. So we optimize our life. We optimize our day-to-day when we can put trust in the forefront and recognize, wow, okay, it's all about this. And if I know what it takes, if I really know what this is, and if I know how to create it and sustain it, I'm golden. Because guess what? Everything's happening in conversation with one another. And if you have the tricks of the trade of what it is and how to do it and how to sustain it, it is really, it makes for a really lovely, lovely experience.
Yeah. I would like to kind of go back a little bit on to the happiness definition before as well, because I would love to unpack the relationship between trust and happiness, that now that you've mentioned that it is the ultimate currency. So I'm thinking there's got to be something here, right? If it's the ultimate currency that's going to help us go through everything in life, smoothly, like what you just said, then it's got to increase our happiness somehow.
Oh, yeah.
And how? That's the question. Like, I'm curious to learn from you how you have found trust to be helping you or others to improve their level of happiness.
Well, I mean, if you think about it just very basically, okay, I'm just going to break it down here. Let's imagine that all emotions could be mapped on a vertical scale, right? So here's neutral in the middle, and all positive emotions increasing in positivity are going this way, and then all negative emotions increasing in negativity are down here.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a very rough, sort of very basic argument that may or may not hold up if I really try to poke holes in it. I could say that, happiness generally is hanging out up here above the neutral line, right? It's kind of hard to be happy when you're down here in frustration or anxiety or anger or even revenge or shame. It's kind of hard to, so this is in my model of understanding this.
Yeah.
Somebody else might argue this, but in my model, happiness, you're going to be hanging out above the neutral line. So in order to hang out above the neutral line, that means that we have to have the capacity for these good feeling states. And in order to do that, our nervous system has to be in that parasympathetic nervous system has to be activated.
Yeah.
And the only way to do that is if we feel safe. And so trust absolutely contributes to that foundation of being able to experience positive emotion.
Yeah.
Because it's going to be really hard to feel positive emotion when you're in a negative state, right? So safety is that sense of safety, that sense of connection, that sense of, when I feel connected with someone, when there's an open, there's that right there, that's a positive feeling. That sense of safety brings you right back up there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting to me, because when you talked about the emotion scale, and then when you were mentioning, like how it could improve or just kind of add to your happiness, what I realized midway through that is, what if I decide to trust more? Because I know that it has to come with safety, and like you said earlier, I wouldn't buy from a brand that I don't know. Obviously, I'm not going to do that. Or, I'm not going to buy from someone I have no idea who they are. But in terms of communications and interpersonal relationship, it might be a little different. What I'm trying to say, and what I mean by that is, if I meet a new person, I know nothing about this person. I'm not going to give them my money if they want to borrow some money, most of the time. But some of the time, I know a little bit about them and I know that they need the help. And I decide to trust them anyway. And I do that. But I feel good because I'm helping that person. And that increases my happiness. It doesn't guarantee that that person will give me my money back, but I decide to trust that person and I feel happier because, I just worry less about all the threats that could be around me. So I try to focus more on the positive side. Now that could be stupid, maybe. I don't know, debatable. But I feel like maybe there's also that paradox of choice as well. You could choose to trust people more. You could choose to give out trust more, and then it'll come back to you maybe. Just like when you meet a new person and you decide to open up, even though you don't know, that much about the person, that's part of the process of building trust, I think.
Yeah. Well, and this is such a big conversation though, because, and it's interesting because it maps back to the myth of normal, as I alluded to. Innately, our ability to open up and trust really does due to our early childhood experiences and how we have taken on adaptive behaviors in order to survive the pain of disconnection, the pain of rejection, the pain of you name it. We can end up in, where we have the tendency, like there are going to be those individuals that it's easier to trust folks, right? Like in my case, it's really easy for me to trust people. Like I 100% always trust people off the bat. But then there are those other folks that are extremely skeptical, and they have to, they approach each relationship with distrust first, and then they have to be proven that they're trustworthy, right? And so, it's the ways in which we show up and our habits and tendencies around trust are largely determined by, and those tendencies are largely going to be determined by our early childhood experiences. Now, what is true about each of us humans is that, all of us our brains are trying to keep us alive. And in order to do that, it's constantly gauging for safety on a non-conscious level. Yeah. And so without you knowing it, your brain is always reading the environment, and it's always trying to keep you safe. And it's trying to keep you safe environmentally, and it's trying to keep you safe socially. When you think about how it's trying to keep you safe socially, what is true for every brain, for every human, is that brain is constantly assessing, and it's non-conscious. This isn't at the level of awareness. And if we were to translate the way in which the brain is looking for safety into 3 questions that would make sense to us, it would be these questions. Now, again, the brain's not asking these 3 questions, but we could translate it into them. So the first question is, am I safe? Do I need to protect myself right now? Am I safe? Right? So that's the first question. Second question is, do I belong? Do I fit in? Am I part of a we? And then the third question, and this is so powerful, is, am I being seen? Am I being acknowledged? Am I being acknowledged? Am I being appreciative? Am I being valued for the I that makes up the we? Now, every brain is craving that. And because I know this, it's really easy for me to look out at each person in every single, like as a human that is desperately on a neurobiological level craving acceptance, belonging, and approval. That's just true. Now, does that take away all their survival mechanisms and the crazy ways in which they show up and try to protect themselves? No, I mean, we all have ways in which we show up, the dysfunction that we've learned, but at the core of it, every single human is craving acceptance, belonging, and approval. And when you can meet that human from that genuine place of, I see you and things are possible, it makes stepping into a state of trust so much easier and creates, more positive trajectories than not.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that opens up a whole different discussion because you mentioned experiences from our early childhood, right? And what I've been learning recently is I feel like everything just goes back to our childhood.
It does.
Everything. And I'm like, okay, now let me think. I haven't been able to trust people as much because XYZ happened. Or I feel like I can trust everybody because, XYZ happened or something went right. And in every single topic that we've been addressing, I feel like if we can just go back to our childhood and look at what happened, that'll answer a lot. Yeah, but that's for a whole different show.
That's a whole other podcast.
It's for a whole different show, actually. It's a parenting show. But yeah, it's just an interesting thing. And thank you for those questions. The three things that you mentioned, totally. I can feel that, and I'm sure everyone can relate with that. We're all human. So even if some people don't say it out loud, I'm sure there's a big part of them that think about it every day. So we know a little bit more about trust. Not that we know everything about it, but we know a little bit more about trust now and the relationship between trust and happiness. So we know that it's important to build trust in our lives. We were talking earlier about characteristics of a trustworthy person as a topic that we would love to address. So how would we know if someone is trustworthy?
Yeah. Well, at this point, like, it's one of those things, like, do you know if they're trustworthy? It's really more of a, what are you sensing, right? What are you sensing from that person? Do you feel, with an individual, do you feel like I feel safe with them, or I don't? Now, it's not so black and white, because there is the phenomenon where we can be uncertain.
Yeah.
And so essentially what's happening here is that when trust is active and we feel trust, we feel connection, the trust network in the prefrontal cortex, we've got oxytocin running. It's opened up our executive functioning brain. We're optimized, feels great. That's trust. Distrust is a survival brain function. And that all that stuff lives in the survival brain. And the hormone that is associated with distrust is cortisol. And so these networks, these two experiences, trust and distrust, they're not mutually exclusive, right? So it's not like if I've got trust on or I've got distrust on, it's not like that. You can have both running at the same time. And the reason and how these get activated, whether it's trust or distrust, is all completely due to the interaction dynamics and the behaviors and the conversations that are happening, the ways in which we are speaking and listening, and how our bodies are reading into, is this safe or is this not? Am I going to release cortisol, or am I going to release oxytocin, or depending upon, like, is this safe or not? And dynamics can be such that you'll get both oxytocin and cortisol at the same time. Both networks active essentially mean uncertainty.
Yeah.
And so, as humans, we have to first gauge, like, do I feel safe? Do I feel like I can trust this person? Do I no, like, ooh, or I'm not sure. And so, that's just something to consider on this end of the equation, where it's like, I'm looking out, like, what does it mean to be trustworthy as I experience you? But when we ask, like, what are the characteristics of a trustworthy person? Baseline, they're signaling safety. They're signaling that sense of warmth and connection and acceptance and belonging. And we'll just break it down to those three questions. I'm signaling, yes, I'm safe. Yes, you belong. And yes, you are seen. And so for a trustworthy, what we're experiencing from a trustworthy person is all of those three things happening at the same time.
I'm making notes here. So interesting. I think that is so relatable, actually. If you really look at applying that into practice, I think the dynamics of relationships change, just like you said. And this reminded me of a past friendship that I had that started out with strong trust. And, it got built even more over time. And, I felt safe, belonged, and seen.
Yeah.
And then at a certain point, the friendship changed due to the nature of our lives. And I realized that I still felt safe. I still felt like I belonged, but I didn't feel seen. And then I started to feel uncertain. And so kind of like when that happened, the trust immediately got wobbled. Like, I don't feel like there's trust there anymore. And I feel like, to me, I don't know about others. I don't know about the psychology behind it and the actual science. But to me, I felt like it was a signal that it was coming to an end and there was no trust there anymore. Because it's a really hard thing to build, and it's even harder to keep. So, it can be built over time, over years, and then it could be broken just like that. at least to me, that's like a personal experience. I've seen that. So when you mentioned the three different pillars, I was like, that's interesting, because if one pillar is down, everything's gone.
Yeah. Well, and the way I teach on this is that anytime one of these, and like you call it pillars, any one of these toggles to no, that's when we get triggered.
Yeah.
So it's when we get triggered that will put us in that not safe state. That I'm not safe, so therefore there's cortisol. No trust. And it really just takes one of these questions to toggle to the no for us to get triggered.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when you mentioned trigger, it's also a big part of our communication as well, right? Because most of the time, I mean, yes, there are two parts of the story. There's communication and there are actions as well. Because, some people just are not great with communication, but they do great things, and vice versa. But you mentioned earlier in our conversation that communication is super important, especially when it comes to building trust. So
it's everything.
I know.
Yeah,
and I know that you did a lot of work into this, and I think you talk about in your work 3 levels of conversation. So, yeah.
Well, this is a big conversation itself, and this is all a part of the conversational intelligence framework, and it's an exceptional framework, and it was founded by the late Judith Glaser, phenomenal, just amazing coach. And we lost her to cancer in 2018, unfortunately. And, a lot of us coaches that have studied under her and certified under her, we're carrying the torch. And in the framework of conversational intelligence, the 3 levels of conversation is an extremely powerful way to understand very simply how all the ways in which we speak and listen map to the production of either cortisol or oxytocin. Because that's really what we're talking about is, am I in a state of trust? Am I in a state of distrust? Am I in a state of uncertainty? And so think of every conversation that you're having as serving up a neurochemical cocktail that's either opening up your brain with oxytocin, or it's closing it down with cortisol, or it's serving up both and you're kind of not sure and you're not, know how to feel about this individual. And so every single conversation is a neurochemical cocktail. And so 3 levels of conversation just very simply break up and make simple all the ways in which we speak and listen with one another. And those 3 levels are, level 1 is the transactional conversation. Level 2 is the positional conversation. And level 3 is the transformational conversation. Now, all 3 of these conversations, they're all normal, healthy. We need them. And in a high trust relationship, we're going in and out and in and out of all 3 of them. There is not one that's better than the other. All 3 have their own function and they're all necessary. Where we get into trouble is when we over-index on one, because there are negative impacts when we over-index on any one of them. And so to be conversationally intelligent is to understand really the function and the purpose of each of these is to be fluid, to be agile, but to be very intentional. And so that's really what the 3 levels of conversation is understanding, okay, what's the neurological impacts of staying transactional for too long? Well, I'll give you the quick and dirty. It creates a lot of cortisol, right? When you're positional, what does that mean? Well, I'm trying to prove a point of view. I'm trying to get you on my side. I got an agenda. I want you to see from my point of view. That actually creates both oxytocin and cortisol. Because I'm listening to you, but I'm trying to get you on my side. So I don't know, do you really have my back? So we create uncertainty. So transactional distrust, positional uncertainty, transformational, that's the kind of conversation in which we are open, we're curious, we're sharing, we're discovering, we're listening to each other to connect with one another. And so that creates lots of oxytocin. So that's where you create a lot of trust. But again, you don't want to stay here for too long because then it's all talk and no action. You don't get too much done. So, you got to be very fluid. And if we want to be conversationally intelligent, we have to understand how they all work and what we need to be doing in order to really fly within and between all of these levels in a very effective way.
Wow. Interesting. Well, first of all, I've never heard of these terminologies before. I'm sure because you've been trained in this area. That's why you're like, yep, I know all these terminologies. I know what they are. But for our audience who might be like me, who might not know what they are, can you elaborate a bit more on each kind of conversation? I know that you mentioned very quickly, transactional conversation. Too much of that might cause distrust. But when can this be good for us? for example?
Well, yeah, because so transactional, we need these because this is how we get stuff done, right? And the nature of a transactional conversation is I'm going to tell you what to do. I'm going to ask you if you did it. So the dynamic is one of tell and ask. And we're just focusing on the thing. It's just a purely exchange of information about the thing. It's the transaction. And so think about it. If I'm highly transactional with you right now, and I'm only focused on the thing, and I'm telling you what to do, I'm going to tell you what to do, I'm going to ask you if it was done, solely focusing on the transaction. Think about what your brain now is picking up in terms of safety. Yeah. It's thinking, I don't know, am I safe? She has no awareness of me. Do I belong? Not really, because there is no awareness of me. It's all about the thing. Definitely not being seen, because there is no awareness of me as a human on the other end of this conversation. It's just about the thing. So when we stay here for too long, we create cortisol, which creates distrust. And so, interestingly, if we talk at the organizational level, cultures that are highly transactional, those are the ones that tend to be toxic because they're over-indexing on trying to get stuff done. But in doing so, there's a tremendous amount of cortisol in the culture, which means there's a tremendous amount of distrust. And there's that, which then means there's a lot of misinterpretation. There's a lot of withholding of information. And so the misconception is, well, we don't have time. We've got to get stuff done. We just got to get through this. And so in prioritizing and strategizing, getting things done, it actually eats away at the trust level of an organization.
Yeah. And this applies
so it works against it. Yeah, it works against the effort.
Yeah. And it applies to our daily lives and our interpersonal relationships with people around us as well, right? Imagine if you have a friend who's only coming to you to ask for stuff. That's, yeah, I agree with you. That can be just the recipe for distrust, and eventually someone will stop talking to the other person. That's most likely what's going to happen. So that's easy to understand, transactional. Now we've covered that in very simple terms. What about positional conversation?
Yeah, positional. Yeah, so that's just the dynamic is one of advocating and inquiring. So instead of telling, I'm going to advocate. Instead of asking, I'm going to inquire because I want you on my side. And so therefore, I'm not listening to get stuff done. I'm listening to defend. And so and listening to prove a point of view. And so what's interesting about that is because of the back and forth dynamic nature of it, it will create both oxytocin and cortisol, because it's like, you're listening to me, but is it for my best? And is it in my best interest? I'm not sure. And so that's why positional conversations continue to facilitate uncertainty and conditional trust.
Yeah.
And the whole point of a positional conversation, it's really to advance ideas, right? So that's why we have positional conversations, and we need these, right? So if we're in organizations and we're trying to move ahead and we're trying to grow, we've got to push ideas forward. Which best one is going to win out? And so it's important, positional conversations are necessary.
Yeah. True. Yeah. I mean, it's a whole different thing compared to what we just talked about, when it comes to transactional conversations. But again, this might not work out. And you're talking about organizations. What I take from that in terms of your interpersonal relationships in life would be if you're only standing your ground and not listening to the other person's point of view, that can easily break the trust as well, because they will go, right. I'm not being seen.
That's right.
I don't
That's
feel
exactly
like I belong. You're not hearing me. Yeah. So
you nailed it. That's exactly right. Yep.
That's true. Yep. See, I'm learning. This is good. Finally, a transformational conversation. Now, by this point, I can kind of guess what it is, but would love to hear from you in terms of what you would like us to know. Especially for the audience that have never heard about this before. What is it, and how can we
transformational
utilize it?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is the conversation that we all know and love. It's our favorite conversations. It's the ones that we have with our best friends. It's the ones we remember. It's, if I were to ask you, gosh, think about all the best conversations you've ever had in your life, it's hands down, it was a transformational conversation. And the interaction dynamic, what makes it transformational is that we are sharing and discovering. Which is very different than telling and asking. Yeah. And it's very different than advocating and inquiring. We're sharing. So to share requires a bit of vulnerability. And when we experience vulnerability in anyone, we immediately feel safe, right? And it invites us to be vulnerable. And again, that's powerful because we want to be seen. And so if we're vulnerable, then that means we can be seen. And so there's a lot of magic going on in that sharing. Now, discovering is very powerful too, because that requires curiosity. That's a prefrontal cortex function. And so that feels really good. And so to discover that in and of itself opens up the prefrontal cortex. And so in a transformational conversation, we are synergizing, we are growing together, we are going beyond the bounds of what is in our conversation. We're not just stuck in a box. Like transactional and positional, we're kind of stuck in a box and we're going back and forth within this box. But transformational, we're thinking outside of the box. So this is where innovative conversations happen. This is where we come up with really powerful solutions. This is when we co-create solutions. The transformational conversation is very we-centric. I'm focusing on us and our mutual success, us together. Transactional is totally I-centric. It's all about me and positional, again, rather I-centric. But what makes transformational feel so good is that, hey, this is about us and what are we creating and how do we win together and what can we do here together and discover. And that right there just feels really, really nourishing.
Yeah. Wow. I love this dynamic. And I think you were saying earlier that too much of anything is never good, right? So I think there's got to be an ingredient somewhere that can help us to utilize our knowledge and, use these conversations wisely, kind of choose a position whenever you are having a conversation. And I think sometimes we do this very naturally. We don't really think about that. Most of the time when we're having a conversation, we're just like, we're in it with something in mind. I want to talk to my friend, or I want to ask for something from this person, or I want to defend my position and just make a point. So subconsciously it's in here. But you mentioned something in your work that is called Conversational Intelligence, or CIQ. So
That's right.
I'm thinking this might be the ingredient. If we know how to utilize it, we can actually have the right balance of the kinds of conversation that we're having to increase the trust, to build trust, and essentially become a trustworthy person as well. So that's my guess.
That's right.
But
no, you were right. And you guessed right.
What is the secret? How can we actually leverage that? And how do you define that CIQ? How do we know
CIQ is conversational intelligence. And so to be conversationally intelligent essentially is having the knowledge and the ability to connect and to navigate, to grow and to co-create with one another in an optimal way in which we truly are optimized. Conversational intelligence is the ability to connect with one another and create and sustain trust so that we can get more done in less time, so that we can feel better, so that we can actually be in healthier states. I mean, when we're in a state of trust and safety, we're actually healthier, right? Because when we're in that distrust, we got a lot of cortisol in our system. That's going to wreak havoc on our immune system. And that has, and so being conversationally intelligent really is about, it's like, what are the tools, what's the knowledge and what's the awareness and the tools that I need to employ in order to be able to connect and to navigate, to co-create with one another.
Yeah. Super cool. This is my first time like seeing the word CIQ, and I'm like, hey, I've never seen this before. This is super cool. So we've talked about.
Doesn't it make sense? Right? Because we have IQ.
Yeah,
and then there's
it does.
EQ, right? IQ and EQ, and then CIQ sits right in the middle.
Yeah.
Because this is really about what's the intelligence that we need in order to relate with one another effectively. And that's a huge piece, because again, everything's happening in conversation. Everything.
Yeah.
Nothing's happening in a vacuum. Yeah.
Absolutely. Totally agree with you, which is why I was about to say, maybe it's time for us to get a little practical. Now let's talk a little bit about habits and practice. So you mentioned how good it is to be aware of our CIQ and to improve it over time. So I'm sure there are tools and things that we can try, but because this is, for most people, especially for me, I know this is new territory. Yeah. What is a habit or a practice that we can try implementing from today that would help us to improve our CIQ?
Yeah, well, there's so many things, and so I'll just kind of give some of the really big low-hanging fruit ones. But when we're in conversation and it's flowing, you keep going, right? There's no reason to stop, no reason to check in, no reason to employ any tools. Just keep going. When you're feeling great, feeling connected, just keep going. It's when things get sticky, right? Which happens often, right? And so whether there's this, and let's just name it, it's a trigger. When we get triggered in conversation, that's usually a sign that there's an opportunity to unlock a jam that's happened as a result of likely over-indexing on one level than another. And so the first question you want to ask yourself is, and this is so powerful, is how I-centric versus how we-centric am I being right now? Because 100%, if we're stuck in conversation, it's because you just got two I-centric, 2 points of view doing this. And it just takes one person to enter into a bit more of a we-centric attitude to often unlock that jam. Because remember, everybody's brain is craving a sense of acceptance, belonging, and approval and being seen. And so when one person goes and just decides to be we-centric, like, let me be we-centric. What's wonderful about being human, that right there is often enough for people to automatically employ their own inner wisdom. And everyone naturally is conversationally intelligent. What gets in the way is our egos. It's like, I'd rather be right than connected.
Yeah.
I would rather win than feel harmony right now. I would rather be right than collaborate, because we have this deep sense of needing to be right over feeling connected. And it tends to be a habit. And so just asking yourself, like, whoa, I'm being really I-centric right now. And then the fallacy is, well, yeah, and I need to be because my point of view is right. And if they just saw it my way and they just hop on my side of the fence, then all would be well. And again, that just creates more cortisol and creates more of the logjam. And so if we want flow in conversation, you first have to kind of go meta and go, am I being I-centric? Am I being, I'm actually being quite I-centric. So that awareness right there is a big one. The second one is if we want the most bang for our buck, it's really minding our listening. It's actually not so much our speaking, it's our listening. Because everyone can pick up on the kind of listening that the other person is experiencing, right? So it's like, I can listen to confirm what I know. I can listen to protect what I know. I can listen to defend what I know. I can listen to judge. I can listen to reject. And all of that stuff isn't very we-centric. But if you want the most bang for your buck in any moment to change any dynamic, what you want to do is change your listening. And the hallmark of a level 3 conversation is the listening. Now, a lot of people think, if you're anticipating what I'm about to say, what the listening is, a lot of people think it's listening to understand. And I say, yeah, good guess, but no, it's not listening to understand. Okay. Because guess what? You can listen to understand transactional, and you can listen to understand positional. So you actually have to go deeper. It's listening to connect. When you drop into listening to connect with the other person, 90% of the time, it's going to completely unlock that jam. And so immediately what emerges from listening to connect is the ability to be open to influence, to be curious, to have the ability to hear hard truths, the ability to share hard truths. And so all that magic becomes available when we shift our listening from listening to confirm or listening to defend to listening to connect.
Yeah. Well, that hits home really hard for a lot of us, because I can confirm with you that a lot of us have heard about listen to understand rather to be understood before. I think that saying is pretty popular, but listen to connect is the next level that probably a lot of us don't know about, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's a practice that we can try. But how should we go about listening to connect? Because for a lot of people, in theory, it's easy to say, yeah, you should see if it's an I-centric conversation or a we-centric conversation, and then change the tone of voice or things like that. But I know that a lot of people struggle with social cues and things like that, and they're just kind of like they're very set in their ways, or they just used to, going about conversations the way that they're used to. So for those that struggle with this, how should they go about it? Like, what could be something to help them?
This is worthy of like a half-day workshop right here. But just, blanket kind of answer to this is, I think one of the hallmarks of being conversationally intelligent is intending. Like when you decide, okay, let me back up. When you decide to be conversationally intelligent, what that requires then is that you have to be aware of your impact now. Because what's happening is you're showing up in conversation, and the way in which you speak and the way in which you listen, the way in which you show up is going to have an impact on someone. Now, what happens is a lot of people are very unaware of their impact. Where people get stuck is they put all of their trust in their intention. So everyone's showing up with a good intention. And let's just be clear, Lou, everyone is showing up with a good intention. No person out there wakes up going, oh, I'm going to be evil today and I'm really going to stick it to Lou today. Like nobody thinks that. And everybody wakes up with a good intention. And where things fall apart is that they go forth with their good intention, but completely lack awareness of their impact. And furthermore, not checking to make sure that their impact is congruent with their intention. And that right there, that lack of awareness is what creates distrust. That's what creates lack of safety, which is distrust. Because if I'm talking with you and I can tell that you are not aware of your impact, I'm not going to feel safe with you. But here's the thing. It's not that you're inherently not safe. It's just that you're not aware of your impact. But if you were aware of your impact, and further, if you knew that my brain was craving that sense of safety, belonging, and being seen, and you knew that and you were aware of your impact, that would absolutely affect how you show up. And it's not like you need fancy tools, and it's not like you need a whole roadmap of here's the process in order to be you would just shift right into what you need to do in order to create that sense of connection. That's the magic of being human, because guess what? Your brain is craving that just as much as my brain is craving that. And so innately what to do. So it takes just deciding to be aware of your impact and then making sure that it matches your intention. And if you do that and only that, that's when the game changes. And so I'll just follow this up with, because I get this a lot in workshops, which is, okay, that sounds great, Amy. How do I get better at being aware of my impact? And I say, well, you have to put a little awareness there. And it's like, okay, as I'm talking to you, what am I reading from you? Is your body language? Are you starting to shy away? Are your eyes, just look at the person. Do they look open and receptive, or are they looking closed down? Are they feeling closed down? Are they feeling receptive? That's enough. That's it. And if you really want to get good at this, and this is where that course is going to come in, meditation is so powerful and helping us build that metacognition and that ability to see while we're in a moment. Because it's not that people can't notice it, it's that they have a hard time noticing it while they're in the moment. And if we want to get good at that, that's where mindfulness meditation really does a powerful job of building that metacognition so that we can do just that.
Yeah. Everything comes back to self-awareness.
Absolutely true. That's right.
Yeah, and totally agree with you. I think a lot of our other guests on the show has mentioned, meditation before, and it's all about that sitting with yourself, understanding what's exactly is going on within, so that you can show up. And I think one more important thing when it comes to trust and all the theories that we've been talking about as well is you kind of reflect what's within as well. So I think it's important to have that self-understanding, and it's actually a big part of what we're doing here at LMSL. We're kind of building this based on the principle that we as humans need to understand ourselves first. Understand how the science behind each and every single element of this whole framework of happiness is going to contribute to your overall happiness. Just like understanding trust, within yourself, or how you're showing up, so that you can carry yourself and understand what others is doing. So kind of like a dynamic, because like you said, right, it's like everything happens in conversation. So we don't know ourselves and we don't know the others, and we're just kind of winging it most of the time. It might create some negative impact without you even realizing in the long term. And it's just really good to understand. So I think the principle that you just mentioned, self-awareness, that's crucial to anyone who would like to start. For some of us, it might be a bit easier than others. So for those who struggle, that self-awareness, that meditation practice would be a really good start. Yeah.
That's right.
Ooh, I love it. Obviously, like you said, that could be a whole workshop. And I'm sure there's so much more to what we're talking about, because I feel like we're just scratching the surface in terms of, the theories and things like that. But in the interest of time, I think it's already a really good conversation starter. What I'm hoping is our audience, after listening to this, will research more about what, the three, what is that? We said before, I don't want to mess up the terminology.
Yeah, the best thing to do, honestly, is to just look up conversational intelligence. Judith Glaser, she wrote the book. There is a phenomenal book, Conversational Intelligence, which
cool.
It's fabulous. So highly recommend that.
Yeah.
For anyone wanting to know more.
Yeah. And the 3 levels of communication. That's sorry.
3 levels of conversation. Yeah.
That's new to me as well, and I'm sure it's new to a lot of people. So the hope is that everyone starts to be more aware of such concept and learn more about themselves so that they can carry themselves better. Because we're at the end of the day talking about building trust and becoming more trustworthy. So I think this is a good start, but it's definitely not the end. Now, we have a lot of interesting audience questions, but I found this one question to be something that we haven't touched on, and it might be interesting for us to unpack a bit more because it's different from the previous conversations we've had. The question is, how do cultural differences and expectations impact the building of trust in different parts of the world, and what strategies can be used to bridge these differences?
There are definitely differences. And, the norm, the social norms and communication norms that we feel that we experience in the US are different in Germany, and then they're different in Japan. And so just recognizing that they are different is important. What isn't different is that every single human is biologically craving that sense of safety, belonging, and being seen. So that is helpful to know that at baseline, lowest common denominator, everybody does want to feel safe and to be seen. But, in light of us talking about being conversationally intelligent, the conversationally intelligent thing to do is to just be transparent, to be explicit, to make the invisible visible with others about, hey, how can I ensure that I've got a strong partnership with you? What sort of behaviors, what sort of norms really work? What triggers you? What opens you up? What annoys you? What helps in our our dynamic here that would be worth focusing on? Yeah. And so something that I like to help I coach people on is it's so powerful to just be explicit in your partnerships and to just to share with someone, hey, I really appreciate and honor our relationship. I want to make it stronger. I want to take this good relationship and make it great. And I just kind of want to zoom out a little bit and just want to check in with you. Like, is there anything I could do differently? Is there anything that works for you that doesn't work for you? Like, how can we actually strengthen our partnership if we look at the way in which we're communicating? And that right there, like, that's such a welcome conversation for most folks, right? Because it's like, hey, thanks. You're taking the time to get to know me and what works. And that's really the best way to go about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with that because what I've noticed in conversations ever since I moved to Australia, it's been interesting. Some people just come and talk to me and they don't really ask about my culture, and I'm okay with that. But on other occasions, I've noticed that I feel really amazing after such conversations where people start asking me about my culture. This is really rare, by the way. Like, I don't get asked about my culture very often, but people would ask me, "Oh, so how do you do this and this in Vietnam? How is it different from here compared to Vietnam?" Like, and those questions, I think, like you mentioned in the 3 levels of conversation, would belong in the transformational category.
That's right. Right. Yeah, you're discovering and you're sharing.
Yeah. And also I was asking them back as well. What did they think about that? And I think like those conversations are really eye-opening. And in terms of the questions that we just got asked, I think obviously there are going to be differences and different expectations from different people, based on their culture. It's a matter of seeking to understand first. So, asking the questions would be really crucial, because we can Google it, obviously, but the upbringing and, like the childhood of each person might be different. So even the culture, if let's just say in my culture, people can ask, oh, like, so how do you do this in your culture? I'll be like, well, normally people do this, but in my family, it's a bit different. We do it like so. So, like, I feel like it's such an important thing, because like you said, nothing happens in a vacuum. So I guess this goes right back to that. Yeah. Well, that covers all of our questions for today. Before we wrap up, is there anything that we haven't mentioned that you would like to share with our listeners?
The only thing that I just get so enthralled and enlivened by is just remembering that, communication, it's really an effect. So the way in which we show up in communication and conversation, it's really rather symptomatic of a lot of the deeper stuff going on inside of us. And so we tend to think of communication as a cause, and we can just stop there. But if we really, 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 really want to rock this game of thriving personally and then in relationship, it's recognizing that this stuff called communication is really a symptom of the relationship we have with ourselves, the beliefs we hold, the interpretations we make, all of that stuff that we don't really pay too much attention to. All of that is the scaffolding from which our communication habits emerge. And so if we really, really want to rock the game of communication, I would say, seeing that there's a whole system going on is really powerful. And that's why I wrote Living on Purpose, because living on purpose, I'm not explicitly talking about communication. I'm going deep into that deep perceptual stuff, which is that scaffolding and foundation from which communication arises. So I just think it's a really fun conversation and stuff to dive into, but helpful to know as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it builds trust, right? When you have those kinds of conversations, and when you focus on what it can bring, it definitely builds trust in any relationships that you're going to go into, or any partnerships, as you mentioned earlier as well. Just to round down the topic of the day. And thank you so much for joining us. I know it has been probably a long day for you, and I think I really appreciate the time that we could spend. I still feel like it's a surreal thing, being able to interview someone from the other side of the world,
right.
and having this conversation. Actually, that shows a lot of trust from your side, because you don't know who we are, but you showed up anyway, and we've been having this discussion. I just really love that, because I was about to say that earlier and I forgot. But this is
hey, guess what? You showed up trustworthy. So, hey.
Thank you. Lovely. Good to know, right? Well,
that's right.
This is the symbol of if we need to give an example on trust, this is it.
There it is. That's right.
Yeah. And finally, I see a lovely dog on the background.
Oh, I know.
So cute.
Kim Masaya, he's like, hey, it's dinner time.
Fabulous. And finally, Amy, for our listeners who are interested in finding out more about your work and would like to collaborate with you, where can they find out more about you?
Yeah, so definitely check out my website, which is alwaysonpurpose.com. Lots of information, lots of resources, practices, articles available there, in ways to connect and work together. And then I'm big on LinkedIn. It's usually really the only social media platform I use, LinkedIn. So my handle's Amy Elisa Wong. And I am on Instagram, but I just don't use it really. You can follow me if you like. I post every so often. Amy Elisa Wong as well. But my book, Living on Purpose, you can find it. I know it's available in Australia, which is great. But it's available off my website, Amazon, really anywhere books are sold. And that's called Living on Purpose, 5 Deliberate Choices to Realize Fulfillment and Joy.
Ooh, I love that. Thank you so much for joining us once again. I hope we are wrapping up just on time so you can have lovely dinner with your family.
Perfect time.
Perfect timing,
Always.
hopefully.
Yeah.
It's been a really enlightening conversation, and I'll have to do a lot of follow-up afterwards, and I hope our audience will do the same.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
You've been listening to Sero Boost, the Happiness Science Insights podcast, produced by the Happiness Science Labs, a division of LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. More episodes are available from 10 life management perspectives and can be found by searching LMSL on Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Spotify, YouTube, and other podcasting apps available on your devices. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, share, and subscribe to our channel so that other people can find it and we can continue to provide quality content. More of our work can be found on our website at ha.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Ngo. Thanks for tuning in.